Greetings, and thank you for joining us for this United Methodist Communications webinar series. My name is Tyrus Sturgis, and I'm Director of Leader Communications at UMCOM. My job is to help leaders grow and strengthen their ability to do their jobs in leading churches. And today we're going to talk about branding. I'm at UMCOM now, but before UMCOM, you would have found me out on the West Coast in Los Angeles as working with brands like Disney and the city of Anaheim. You may have found me in Mississippi doing public affairs work for State Farm Insurance. Maybe in Alabama, working with Alabama Power and Alabama State University, or even at WPPA, Association of Professional Photographers, on individual brand building. My life's work has been building and protecting brands, internationally, on a national level, state level, and even individual level. And effective branding for churches has never been more important. We live in a digital and media-driven age today. First impressions last, and a church's brand presence can literally be the difference between someone attending, interacting with your church, or just forgetting your church altogether. When we talk about the term branding, the first thing we want to establish is that it's more than a logo, it's more than a cute font. Those are elements of branding, but it's much deeper than that. Branding is your church's emotional connection, the experience your church provides, and the reaction to your congregation's presence in the community. So as your church influences lives and brings people to Christ, a compelling brand is essential to building trust, respect, and positive recognition. Now, unfortunately, the topic of branding for many congregations is taboo. It's too commercial, it's too businesslike. But make no mistake, whether you embrace branding or not, your church has a brand. Now, it may not be a thought out brand that's been adopted, it may not be something that you've planned, but the community has branded your church on what they've seen, what they've personally experienced, or what they've heard about from others, in person, on the internet, social media, what have you. So this webinar is designed to be introductory. It's designed to provide a perspective on how to approach branding and establish a foundation for identifying and building your church's brand. In our time, I hope to give you techniques that can help your church be more proactive in creating and sharing your brand with others. Brand identity is more than a compliance to standards. It's about delivering an experience that builds bridges and trust among your audiences. Each congregation has something different or something special that it brings to the table. And embracing those gifts is essential to building your brand. It's a component of expressing who you are and how you relate to the community. Let's look at some other reasons why branding is really important in the life of a church. Why church branding? First of all, it supports recognition. Consistent branding will help your potential guests recognize and feel more at ease about visiting your church. I asked a couple of people, what's your church's brand? What do people think of your church? And they thought for a second and they said, I really don't know how to answer that. But what I can say is what we put out about your church is who we are, and it will prep you for a visit to our church. And that was a good starting point. You want your brand to be consistent and let visitors know what they can expect. If you're the friendly church, then you should be friendly when you're out in the community. If you're a church that brands yourself on outreach, then you should have the outreach ministries that support what you're purporting to be. Number two, your brand sets you apart. Though you're not in competition with other churches, your church has been called to live out the Great Commission in its own individual way. If you try to be all things to all people, you end up being nothing to everyone. So your brand will designate and identify those things that make you unique and how you can connect with people in the community. Creates a connection. A strong brand connects with people at an emotional level. It leads to positive feelings and a strong bond. It's really who you are, and it allows people to feel who you are, not just who you say you are, which leads to delivering on a promise. What your community thinks and says about your church may be a little different than what you say about your church all the time. So what promise is your church living out? Is your church actually living out what it purports and intends it to be, itself to be? Core values. Your brand experience illustrates your core values to members, visitors, and the community. Interaction with your church, or when your church is interacting with people, are you telling the right story? Are you doing things that invite and welcome people to Christ as you intend to? You want people to hear your church name and to see your church logo and remember you for the right reasons. And those reasons involve how you, your staff, and members are living these things out in the community. Church branding helps with motivation and desire and direction. Not just direction externally, but also motivation and direction internally. Knowing what does our church stand for? Who are we? What are we moving toward? Stimulates people internally as well as externally. If you're thinking, one part of your church is thinking, oh, we're the church that serves soup to people. That's what we do. And another part of your congregation or your staff is thinking, well, we're the church that teaches about Christ, and you have people pulling in different directions, then it dilutes and will hurt your brand. So brand looks internally also to make sure, hey, we're connecting around the same thing. We have clarity, we have focus in what our church is about. And with that clarity, we can move forward in building our brand. So where do you get started on this road to brand building? First step is to identify a purpose and a process to achieve the purpose. Now, with the purpose and process in mind, you can better communicate and display who your church is, how your church behaves, and what values your church holds closely. Now, the first part of that process is having a discussion about branding, answering some questions and looking internally to see where are we, what is our brand, and how are we even looking at branding. And these things help your community understand who you are as a church and how better to resonate with people in those communities. So what we'll do is go through 10 questions you can ask to start shaping your perspective and approach to branding. First and foremost, why was your church created? When this church was founded, why was it created? What need was our church trying to reach? Of course, bringing people to Jesus, but what else are we trying to accomplish? And even ask yourself, is that founding purpose still relevant? Does it express what we're trying to accomplish today with our brand? Second, what is your church's mission? What are we striving to achieve in the long run? What does success look like for this church? And how are we expressing that success or that mission with the people we're trying to reach? Third, what audience are you working to reach? What audience are you working to reach? I mentioned that a brand can't be all things to all people. Who does your brand connect with? If your church is going to be branded as, hey, we're modern and we're new age, we're connecting with millennials in different ways, then your service should reflect that. Your social media presence should reflect that. Your congregational makeup may need to reflect that. Simply saying or saying who you want to be to an audience does not mean that you're resonating with that audience or are part of that audience. So who are you working to reach? And that can depend on a couple of things. One, what audience is available in your area? And two, who are you positioned to reach? So take a look at who are we trying to serve here and who should we be serving based off the unique factors of our church. And four, what is the most important goal of the church? And you'll see mission and why your church is created and purpose. These things keep coming up because it's important to be strongly centered or have central values or a core set of values here. What's the most important goal of this church? What are we trying to accomplish? Who are we trying to serve? How are we trying to serve? What's the one thing that we can do that will give us some degree of success? And with it, how do you take that and express it and share that with the people you're trying to reach? That will be a critical component of your brand. When looking at branding or establishing a brand, you also have to consider, what does our church do well? What are we good at? I talked with one church and they said, well, we don't really have a brand. We're just known kind of as the church that has a really good choir. Well, that's one element that church may consider building its brand around, that we connect with Christ through song and you can feel the Spirit moving when we sing. If your church does something well, don't disregard it. Think about how can we make this a central part of the message we're sharing of who we are, because it's something that we do well and that appeals to people. It's a bridge or a connection to the audiences that we're trying to reach. 6, what values drive the performance of your staff? What values drive the performance of your staff? And I reiterate that because your church's values and the values that drive the people who are doing the work on behalf of the church may be different. And those things need to align. Is your staff or the people doing the work, are they motivated by creativity? Are they motivated by flexibility? Are they motivated by seeing instant impact to ministries? Or are they motivated by teaching and long-term growth in people? But what are the values or the elements of the people you're working with or who are doing work with the church that are important? And how can you build those into your mission and also into your brand? Those are strong considerations. If your staff values flexibility in worship groups, in small groups, then your church should reflect that. If your staff doesn't like those things, is more rigid, then maybe you shouldn't position yourself or brand yourself as the flexible church. So think about what you have internally, resource-wise, and what drives your internal resources when establishing your brand. On the other side of the spectrum is, why would the unchurched attend your church? There are people out there who want a relationship with God, who are interested in thinking about church. What about your brand, or what are you putting out there that would make these people want to attend your church? And it goes beyond a cute logo. If you're saying we're welcoming to everybody, are your members demonstrating that they're welcoming to everybody? If you're saying we're the church that teaches, are you demonstrating how you teach in your social media presence, in videos that you put out from your church, in blogs that you may write? Is a pastor or someone from your congregation a thought leader in the community that's sharing these things? Why would someone want to come to your church, or how would they connect with your brand? And are those things being demonstrated in the community through your members and through any communications that you're having? 8, what are the potential barriers to success? Building a brand requires an internal commitment, of course, identifying things that your church is good at, that you're strong at. But what are the barriers that could prevent us from building our brand like we want to build it? Is there some event or something that's going on in the community that's a cloud over the church that needs to be addressed? Are there historical implications that need to be considered in building a brand? Are the demographics the same as they were when the church was founded, or are they changing, and has the church done something to address those things? But be honest and say, what can stop us from doing this? Maybe we don't have the manpower. Maybe we don't have the budget. So if you can't execute on your brand or be who you purport to be, then maybe that shouldn't be an element of your brand. It's important to be really honest about what our strengths are, where our weaknesses are, and what those barriers may be to success out there. 9, how do you view the future of your church? I think your brand should go along not only what you have right now, but how you view the future of the church. Are we looking to grow exponentially? Is that the biggest focus of our church? Or we're really focusing on strengthening our congregation right now? What are you doing, or what's the biggest thing on the horizon for you, and how should your brand reflect that? Oftentimes you'll see organizations will start making big sweeping changes with technology, undergo a lot of change, and they're doing all these things and nobody really gets it. Well, it's because that organization may say, well, yeah, this may not work right now, but we've examined trends and we've looked at the future, and this is how we can have the biggest effect in the long run by making these changes now. Now, those are internal changes, but those changes are the foundation in how that company will project itself. Tim, what's the most important thing you want others to know about your church? What's the most important thing you want others to know about your church? In relaying your brand or your brand promise, what do you want people to accept? What one thing do you want to take away from that interaction? And I mentioned earlier, working with State Farm Insurance, everybody's familiar with like a good neighbor, State Farm is there. Well, the good neighbor focus at State Farm goes far beyond a commercial tagline. The good neighbor focus goes into employee training. With every interaction you have with the customer, State Farm wants you to create a raving fan. And you create a raving fan by being a good neighbor. How? On phone calls, you listen. If you go out on a claim visit, you pay very attention to what the client wants. You inspect damage as if the house were your own. Now, I understand results may not come back like we want all the time with insurance claims, of course, but that's the process. That's what being a good neighbor meant. So if you go to someone's house and you can't pay for their claim, you at least did it respectfully. You said, yes, ma'am, no, sir, I'm sorry, we can't handle this, but we can handle this. That even in tough times, everything you did should reflect that you're a good neighbor. So in that essence, what about your church do you want to reflect? What's that one thing you can get and share out there that your church has the ability to live through and to deliver? That should be a critical component of branding. Now, identifying your brand or building a brand is a journey. Like I mentioned today, we're getting started with some foundational discussions about that. Hopefully those questions serve as a really good guide for you in building a brand and sharing your story. And then when you start thinking about your church's work and living out your brand, there are some other things to consider as well. First is be authentic. Be authentic. If you take a look at the graphic here, what you see is a mirror and an apple and a reflection. Well, it's kind of odd that the green apple has a red reflection. Well, it's kind of odd also when you try to be something that you're not. You want to attract people to your church, but you need to make sure you're doing it the right way. Your branding should not be a clever disguise or a bait and switch that lures people with false imagery or tricks people and changes their expectations so that they don't reflect who you truly are. If you're a green apple, be a green apple. Be the best green apple you can be. But an important component of brand, of course, is trust. You are who you say you are. Second, be relevant. Your brand should be relevant. Relevant does not mean being worldly or compromising your standards or doing something that you're not comfortable with. Branding means understanding that churches are working with communities that are changing, with surroundings that are changing. And these may be some things that need to be addressed. When you look at why your church was founded, what needs the church is trying to address, take into account what local communities or the communities you're serving may need. There may be a big social issue that needs addressed. There may be a need such as hunger. But what is the need in the community that makes you relevant? How is your brand or what you're expressing to be make you relevant? If you're in a desert, for instance, and your brand is we provide water to keep you hydrated, well, that's fine. That's a very relevant brand. You take that same branding and put it in a city, in a restaurant where there's water, where there's resources everywhere, you're not really relevant. That need's provided for us already. What can you do right now? And for something as important as the church, finding and identifying that need, that relevant need, or what elements make you relevant in your community is extremely important. Be transparent. By transparency, your brand should allow people to get some insight into who you are. A better outlook into your church will give others an opportunity to identify how they can connect with your church. Being transparent in branding today means how are we showing people, who we really are? How are we showing people how our church operates, even within the congregation? To be relevant and to be real is a critical component in today's market, especially with so much criticism around the church and its purpose. demonstrate that, we're people too, we're working for Christ, and we're trying to meet the needs in the community. We see the same things you see. We experience the same struggles that you experience. And maybe demonstrate how that occurs with members of the congregation, with people in the church, to say, hey, we're not perfect or not better, but we'd love for you to join this journey with us, this journey toward fulfilling our mission to serve God. So be transparent with how your church operates. Brand has to be a real thing. Be unified. Now, as your church considers its branding as a whole, make sure that everybody's on the same page. And that's an interesting approach, because a church is going to be filled with different personalities, with people who see things different ways. But your church should be established to meet a need that the people who make up your church can all gather around and rally around to serve it. So everything from your visuals to your community outreach to your web presence should be consistent and be unified as your congregation is. For instance, the brand elements you're very familiar with, such as your logo and your website and your social media channels, have the same URLs if possible. If it's at mychurch.com, or if it's mychurch.com on your website, then hopefully you have at my church as your social media handles, and for your YouTube channel if you have one. If you're sending information out, you want to refer them to hopefully an email address that's consistent. But being unified and having some consistency is going to be very important about your brand. And I could say everything's important about your brand, because it consists of all of the things and all of the ways that you connect with and relate to people in your community. So there are several tools that are available to help you in reaching your communities. One is the Mission Insight tool, and these are reports on the demographics and surrounding areas in your community. This will give some insight into who's actually around us, who are we serving, to help you shape your brand and see the audiences you're trying to connect with. Those are accessible at umcomresearch@umcom.org. So via email, send your address of your church to umcomresearch@umcom.org, and you'll get those reports, which should be extremely helpful for you. Another tool that we've made available is the Church Marketing Planning tool to help with better communication, faithful stewardship, God-designed purpose. But this church marketing plan tool will go hand in hand with developing your brand. It walks you step by step through establishing mission and vision and those things, the core components I talked about to building your brand, and will reiterate that your brand has to be authentic. It's everything you do. It's real. And so the URL there is umcom.org, learn/market your church. But you see the URL right there. Thank you for participating in today's webinar. I hope I didn't take up too much of your time, but I hope this time sparked a yearning and desire for you to learn more about branding, taking a different approach and look at branding for your church, and start asking those questions to say, what is our brand? Are we reaching the people we need to reach? What do we need to do to start addressing this issue? I'd like to thank the participants of the Black Church Leader Engagement Panel for working with us. And if you have any questions or comments or additional information following up from this session, please email Teresa Faust at tfaust@umcom.org, and she'll get those addressed, and I'll be glad to address those with you as well. Again, I'm Tyra Sturgis. Thank you for joining us.